Give me one moment. This might be a silly question, but I don't know how to, oh, here we go. I figured it out. Okay. So can you all see this? Perfect. Okay, well, hi everybody. My name is Alexa Naccarato. I'm a Master's of Arts in Communications candidate here at the University of Ottawa. And this afternoon, I'll be presenting an overview of my thesis and research to date on data literacy and communication studies. The title of my thesis is Data Literacy, How Developing Best Practices for Higher Education in Communications Will Drive Innovation in Tomorrow's Workplace. So to begin, data has penetrated nearly every aspect of our lives and in nearly every industry. We're both consumers and producers of data, and this data exists in the news that we read, the politics we participate in, the social media that we contribute to, and the information that we look up online, just to name a few. Data literacy has become one of the most important competencies for a citizen to exercise in their personal and professional life, especially considering the abundance of data and the good and bad representations of data in our world today. Data literacy contributes to more informed decision-making, making it extremely important and is frequently being utilized more and relied upon in organizations to drive innovation and change. These skills are especially important amongst communication practitioners, as interpreting and communicating data to various audiences is the foundation of information sharing in marketing, politics, crisis management, healthcare, and so much more. Now, data literacy and competencies to understand and communicate data in research are typically acquired in post-secondary education. However, the literature on this subject has demonstrated that existing curricula are lacking robustness, adaptability, and transferability of skills into the workplace that are much needed and in our ever-changing world at large. My thesis seeks to justify the importance of communication students acquiring and mastering research competencies and data skills and a high degree of data literacy. The underlining theme of my study is that improving data and research skills will better prepare students for the workplace and for their personal lives. And I've explored two areas in my research, both the organizational side as well as the academic side. And this is largely because the two areas rely upon and benefit each other, and I'll explore why. Scholars define data literacy as the ability to identify, collect, organize, summarize, and prioritize qualitative, quantitative, and statistical data and use this information in everyday life. Someone with strong data literacy skills would have the ability to, for example, read and interpret summary statistics in everyday media through graphs and tables, statements, surveys, and more. These foundational skills, as well as more complex data literacy skills, are becoming increasingly demanded in the professional world, and more organizations are valuing the ability for employees to analyze and create explanations from data and evaluate the validity of these findings. Scholars point out that in some cases, the absence of such skills can deny citizens access to formal forms of employment. Some employers are investing in further training opportunities and professional development for their employees so that they can acquire these skills. And while offering this training in the workplace is progress, it's not standard practice across the board. Scholars highlight that there is a common belief that academic institutions hold the responsibility to teach young professionals these foundational skills in data, research, and technology. When examining the academic side of things, one of the greatest obstacles in data and research education has been due to student attitudes and somewhat poor feedback on these courses, which has created more difficulties in teaching this material to students. Students tend to have negative views towards research methods courses as they're perceived as being dry, boring, outdated, and irrelevant to their specific careers. And in many cases, there's hesitation amongst students when starting these courses because there's a general sense of fear and anxiety towards learning statistics and working with equations and numbers. And this is especially true in the humanities. The greatest takeaways in both aspects is that more research is needed in this area, and that to improve the state of data literacy in the job market, consultations between organizations and academic institutions must take place to derive insight into current job market demands and ensure that students are being taught transferable and relevant material so that they can exercise data literacy and research skills in the workplace and beyond. So that's what I did. I took the advice of scholars and gathered perspectives from faculty members in communications, and I also gathered perspectives from practitioners in the communications field to learn about how these skills are being taught and how organizations are using these skills so that curricula can be improved. Considering the facets of this study, I had 3 research questions. The first is, how is research methods and data literacy being taught to undergraduate students enrolled in communications programs at the University of Ottawa and at Carleton University? What data and research skills are needed by Ottawa-based employers in the communications field who are looking to hire the next generation of communication professionals? And the third research question is, how can the communications curricula at both universities be improved to better prepare undergraduate students for their careers? Because I was following a consultation approach to my thesis, I hosted a qualitative study and selected a thematic analysis for my research, as these methods are typically, they lend themselves best to gathering and interpreting a rich amount of data. I hosted semi-structured e-interviews through Microsoft Teams, and the semi-structured interview style really allowed for me to have organic conversations with participants to learn more about their experiences and still maintain a sense of structure. I recruited 16 participants from 2 different participant groups. One group consisted of 8 professors from both the University of Ottawa and Carleton University, and 8 practitioners in communications, both from the private and public sector. I reached out to professors at both universities by email, and I reached out to professors specifically who have been teaching research methods courses in the undergraduate program in communications at both schools. To qualify for this study, they had to have been teaching at the university within the last 3 years, they had to be currently teaching, and they had to have taught at least 1 research methods course. For the second group of participants, I sent LinkedIn messages or InMail to communication professionals in Ottawa. And to qualify for this study, these practitioners had to be working in a discipline of communications like social media or public relations. They had to hold a managerial role, or that of a superior, and they had to have worked with a communication student or graduate within the last 3 years. And as I mentioned, I had 16 interviews in total, and these lasted between 30 to 45 minutes per interview. So after each interview was reviewed and transcribed, I used in vivo software to develop a coding scheme to organize my data in 2 different themes. I had a total of 19 codes, which were then organized into 3 overarching themes in the data, with 2 to 3 sub-themes per theme. The first is academic themes, which include sub-themes on institution, students, and professors. The second theme is organizational themes, which include sub-themes on organizations who use data and the skills in the workplace that are needed in this area. And the third theme were general themes, which included definitions of data literacy, the importance of data literacy, and the transferability of skills. I then created a content map to demonstrate from my own understanding how all of these themes fit together. And this is a snapshot of what all of the data looked like connected to one another. And I'll go through each one just to give you a quick overview of my different codes and themes. So for your reference, the dark blue bubbles here are the overarching themes. The medium colored bubbles are the sub-themes. And then these light blue bubbles here are my specific codes within the data. So you can see some more details here on some of the academic themes. So we have under institution, what participants said about improving the curriculum and their advice in this area, any challenges they had with the curriculum at both universities, as well as their interpretation of the university's philosophy. We then go on to the student theme, which includes student progress and research methods from the professor's perspective, student feedback on the courses and research methods, and the fear of data and numbers. Then we go on to professors. So some themes within this section included a fear of actually teaching data and research methods, and how their courses that they've taught have influenced research methods courses and vice versa. And any kind of teaching methods in particular that these professors have used to teach this material to students. Then we have general themes, so how participants defined data literacy, both in a professional context, personal context, and just at large. The importance of data literacy and data in general. And then also the transferability of skills, so any kind of advice they had to students, both in an academic context and then outside of university. There's more information here on specific skills. So any kind of expectation that employers or employees, colleagues would have of data skills in the workplace, a lack of data skills in the workplace and the implications of that, and what specific skills related to data literacy are required. And then finally, we have the use of data from an organizational perspective. So how organizations use data, the repercussions of organizations that don't use data in their work, using data in the future, and specific research tools that are used in the workplace in the communications industry. So that's just a general overview of how all of my data fit together into this one story. So at this stage in the process, I'm currently doing my data analysis. I decided to follow an interpretivist approach to my research, which is commonly used in qualitative studies. I focused on having organic, in-depth interviews with my participants and focused on their thoughts and experiences and ideas on how they thought the communications curricula could be improved, and how to better prepare students for the workplace or entering into the industry. One thing I noticed during my data collection thus far and in my analysis is that there was saturation in my data. I hosted 8 interviews with professors and 8 interviews with practitioners, and much of the data was quite repetitive, especially towards the end. And there weren't really any new themes at that point that were emerging from the interviews. I noticed this specifically with challenges with teaching this material to students as being one theme or one code, and the importance of data literacy skills in general from both an academic perspective and an organizational perspective. So it was pretty easy to see patterns in the data and kind of validate those perspectives. So because I'm seeking to understand different perspectives on how to improve communications curricula from a research methods and data angle, and I pulled patterns or themes from the data to draw these conclusions, I created an analysis model that compares the barriers and the solutions to this subject. I've taken the approach of understanding what are the specific problems and what are the specific solutions to improving data literacy skills amongst communication students. because there are both academic barriers as well as organizational barriers. And I'll provide some specific quotes from the data on what I mean by this. So some of the academic barriers include institutional barriers. An example of this taken directly from the data, a quote here is that universities need to acquire a better understanding of industry and stakeholder needs. There are also barriers to learning and how students have a complete lack of understanding of the scientific method. And there's also barriers to teaching, such as there being few full-time professors who can teach these courses year after year. There are also some organizational barriers, such as expectations. There's an expectation that communications practitioners have data literacy skills. There are sector barriers, and that there's no high data literacy in smaller nonprofits and in government. And recruitment barriers. People don't have high data literacy coming out of a bachelor's of communications, making it challenging to find qualified workers in this area. So what are the main takeaways? One of the overarching barriers from an organizational perspective is that organizations in communications have difficulty finding employees who have strong data literacy skills that are relevant to their work tasks. And a solution to this is that academic institutions should gather insight from practitioners to learn what the job market demands are and how these skills are being used in the workplace. And then this information and insight can be incorporated into curricula. The second overarching barrier is an academic one, and that is that there are challenges teaching this material to students to make the content meaningful, interesting, and relevant to their careers. And one of the solutions to this is that academic institutions should bring practitioners into the classroom to demonstrate how data and research are used in the communications field. There are more barriers and solutions that I'm still exploring in my data, but what I've concluded thus far is that organizations and academic institutions must work together to improve curricula and prepare students for the future by equipping them with data literacy. Organizations need academic institutions, and academic institutions need organizations to make this work. We need insight from both groups to truly improve the system. So that concludes my presentation. I wanted to acknowledge the fact that this study is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. I wanted to thank my thesis supervisor, Meredith Rocky, and my committee, Stephanie Hofstein and Martine Lagacé. And I also wanted to thank the entire research team for their support. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask me now, or you can send me an email with any questions you might have. And here are my references. Thank you.
Wonderful and very informative presentation. Thank you, Alexa. We will ask that any questions for this panel be directed to the presenters directly, just as we are starting our faculty series talks at 5. Et maintenant, je voulais introduire Gabrielle. Oh, you're